Hey guys, this is going to be a summary of what we're going to be looking at. And we're going to be first looking at salt concentration, comparing fish versus sharks. Then we'll take a look at senses that both bony fish and sharks have and the comparison and contrast. We'll take a look at how they sense and how they hear. We'll then take a look at what determines sex and mechanisms that ensure a successful population. And that's about it what we'll be looking at for today. So we're going to first start with the salt concentration. So fishes stay at 14 parts per thousand in a 35 parts per thousand ocean. By the way, I can't remember if I told this to you or not, but fishes is actually correct. If you have multiple number of individuals of the same species, then you have fish. But if you have multiple individuals from multiple species, then you have fishes. So it actually is appropriate to say fishes so long as you're talking about two different species of fish. So they're in the ocean. The ocean is 35 parts per thousand. They are 14 parts per thousand. They have a higher water concentration than the ocean. So what's going to happen as a result of that is fish constantly spend energy to keep the internal saltiness less than the ocean, meaning that they are fresher than the surrounding salt. Remember, we looked at this a couple chapters ago. So they're going to be constantly losing water. And so to compensate for that, they're going to have to excrete excess salt at the gills, and they'll also have very, very salty urine. Compare this to sharks. In sharks, kidneys retain the urea. This is a nitrogen waste product. Most species actually expel this, but they have a mechanism of retaining it. And so they have an internal concentration of 35 parts per thousand. It's the same as the ocean. So the result of this is that sharks do not have to spend energy fighting the ocean saltiness because they're the same concentration. So that's a comparison between sharks and fish. Looking at senses, we're going to first start with sight. Bony fish have good color vision. So you might remember from biology that there are two neurons in our eye, or two photoreceptors. One of them is a rod, and the other one is a cone. Cones will give you good color vision, and rods give you kind of black and white, or enable you to see in the dark a lot better. So the rods are for light detection, and the cones are for color vision. So again, cones in the retina, even in ourselves, this detects color. The rods detect light. So imagine you're in the what's called the upper epipelagic, the epipelagic zone. The pelagic, if you remember, is the area of the water that is going to be where creatures will swim, and we have the benthos, or the benthic region, down in the bottom. So the pelagic is anything in the water column. We have this region called the epipelagic. The epi, like our epidermis, is on top. So the very top of the pelagic, this is where light is. So since light is there, you would imagine that fish have the capacity to see, may also have capacity to see good color. So in the upper epipelagic, where there's high light, fish have cones, and they also have rods. There's plenty of light, so they have the capacity to see the color in those regions. The lower epipelagic, this is a low light region, sort of like the midnight zone. Okay, fish only have rods. The reason why is there's not enough light to actually see color. The only color they would be able to see down there anyway would probably be blue, because all the other colors, if you remember from chapter 3, are absorbed in the water column. So sharks are colorblind. So the question is, what will they have? Will they have rods? Will they have cones? Well, since they're colorblind, they have exclusively rods. And because they have exclusively rods, they're sort of like dogs. Dogs have the ability to see at night with very good vision. And that's because instead of having all the photoreceptors in their eye and their neurons in their eye that are focused on seeing color, it's for seeing dim light. So sharks have the ability to see very well in very dim light. So smell. Smell is sort of like taste for the fish. And the nostrils, they provide a really good sense of this smell and taste. Here's an aside: the salmon can smell or taste the water to find the river they swam down years and years before. There's a video, I've seen a video where they've taken a fish and they've dissected a portion of its skull and connected electrodes to its brain. The fish was tagged so they knew what river that it came down from. And it's in the laboratory, and they had 3 water samples. And 2 of the water samples came from rivers that were sort of upstream and downstream. So there's 3 rivers that all lead to a very similar place. And what they did is they took the water from the first river, which was a river that was maybe to the south, for example, of the river of the salmon. And they took the water and they flushed it in the nostrils, and there was no effect whatsoever. They took the second water sample, and the second water sample was from the river that was north of the river from the salmon that they were testing. They flushed it up the nostrils, and nothing really happened. They took the third sample, which was the water that came from the river that the salmon swam down years ago. They flushed it in the nostrils, and the brain charts went crazy. What this was showing scientists is that it was recognizing its own river that it swam up. And I don't believe this is a thinking process, but it's more of a reflex. It was a reaction to having the similar smell, taste. It was programmed in the brain of the salmon as it was swimming down the river. So when it was out in the ocean and it was searching for the river to come up, it recognized it because of the chemical composition. So salmon swim very, very close to shore, trying to find the river to swim up. And when they encounter the water, their brain just goes crazy. It's a reflex. And then they respond to that by swimming up. So hearing, we looked at the lateral line, and here's a good example of the lateral line. You can see in the picture, especially towards the tail, you can see these little pits, and it curves up in the middle of the body, kind of follows the body plan towards the head. So this is the lateral line. It's a line on both sides of the fish. It detects pressure waves from other individuals. So I made the analogy of you're standing on the corner of a street and a truck blows by. You feel that pressure wave, that gust of wind. It's the same thing in the ocean, that these fish can feel the pressure waves from far away. They also have otoliths. Oto means ear. Lith, if you remember from chapter 2, when we're looking at lithogenic sediments like sand and rock and silt and clay. Okay, if you were to go to an ear, nose, throat doctor, they are called otorhinolaryngologists. They call them ENTs for short, though, for the ear, nose, and throat. But oto means ear, and lith means rock. And this is a calcium stone, and it functions with cilia to determine the direction of sounds. Now, it has these little hairs, those are the cilia, and it has the otolith that can move around. And we have otoliths in our ears as well. And it helps us, for us, it helps us with balance. Behavior and territoriality. So, how? Fish will aggressively swim around other fish. And when they do that, it stresses out the other fish. So if other people were surrounding you, that would probably stress you out too. You're in your little comfort zone. So why do they do this? They're defending their area for many reasons, for reproduction, for food, and for shelter. So they can swim around each other to indicate that they're in the wrong place. And they're using these areas to grow food such as coral reefs. Some fish will eat the coral living material so that the skeleton remains, and then the coral then will grow very fine algae on it, and they have these little gardens that they keep for themselves. They will defend those. Also for shelter, to be defended from sharks at night or for other predators, and for reproduction. Schooling. Why do fish school? So we talked about the search image and how they can get some protection from predators. And it's difficult for a predator to focus on multiple moving objects. They can't really target one. They have to isolate it from the rest of the school, and that's what they'll try to do. And once they isolate it, then they'll be able to eat that individual. So it's difficult for predators to focus on multiple moving objects. Also, flashes for those that have the iridophores that have the very iridescent, okay, they can flash and that might distract the predator. And if they're in large numbers, you will always be near someone for reproduction. So it's going to make reproduction a lot easier as well. So what determines the sex of a fish? It's a little bit different than higher animals. So we're going to take a look at this. So in humans, male sex chromosomes are XY. Okay, female sex chromosomes are XX. So it's the Y chromosome for us males that makes us male. In fish, however, male sex chromosomes are XY, female sex chromosomes are XX. So it looks like it's the same, but there's more. In fish, sex is also determined by other characteristics, such as non-sex chromosomes and hormones. So the other chromosomes can affect what sex it is, as well as hormones. There's an experiment that we're going to be taking a look at. If you take fertilized eggs of some species and you provide them with an appropriate amount of estrogen, what will happen is all those eggs, even though they may have been XY, will develop into females because of the estrogen. And vice versa. If you take the fertilized eggs and you added a high amount of the hormone testosterone, you would get all male fish from that stock. So you can actually control the amount of females and males in a population if you are trying to control them. So mechanisms to increase the next generation. We'll take a look at that one later since it has a little graph. I apparently can't go back to that. Sorry about that. Here's another mechanism where one male can fertilize multiple female eggs. So it would be successful to have more females than males. So if you really only need one male to fertilize multiple eggs, then a successful population for adults might be having a higher concentration of females. The more females that you have, the more eggs that you'll be able to get to be reproduced and fertilized. So a fewer number of males is going to be required. One way of doing this is what's called sequential hermaphroditism, or sequential hermaphrodites. This is in a sheephead species, and I provided a picture for you as well, where they start off as females. So the beginning of their life, they start off as females, but then they're going to be changing into males. So they go through this transition from being female to male. Now, we didn't see in the previous chart, but if you can imagine the survival rate of a population is going to go down over time. The most number of individuals that you will have of a species will be in the eggs. Okay, many of those eggs in the very early stage are going to get reduced. They're going to die. They're going to be eaten. Okay, now you have a few individuals that are immature, that are growing. Even some of those will be succumb to predation. And so your population gets lower and lower and lower. It sort of looks like a hyperbola. It is starting off high and it gets less, and then it gets less, and then it gets less. So the beginning of life, they're all immature individuals. The middle of life, they're all females. At the end of the life, they're all males. So what this means, though, is at the end of the life, there's going to be very few individuals that are alive. Again, most of them are alive during the eggs. When they're young, there are fewer because they have been eaten, and that continues to go on. There's fewer and fewer. So at the end of your life, you will have very, very few individuals that are left. Those are going to be the males. Versus in the middle of the life, they're going to be all female, and there's going to be more of them. So now we have more males compared to females. Sorry, more females compared to males. You have a small amount of males in the population because they're old, versus the younger and more of them are going to be females. So the population ratio in the sheephead is going to be about 5 females to 1 male. So again, the population graph that we saw previously, let me go ahead and see if I can draw that in here. Okay, so you have this graph that looks like this, if you can draw this on your graph, and it's going to look like that. Okay, over here we have, I'm going to do my best, we have your eggs. Okay, up here, these are all your eggs. We have lots of them, but they die or are eaten. Okay, and here we have maybe the immature right here. And then here we then have the females. Okay, and then towards the end of the life over here, we then have the males. Sorry, wrong symbol. They have the males. Okay, so again, the eggs, the majority of your population are eggs, millions of them, okay, and then that drops off rapidly. So at the end of the life, they're only males, and there's going to be very few individuals here compared to all of the females that you have here. So you have some males here, so you have majority females. So you have 5 females for every 1 male. Polygamists, some species have multiple partners. This is the LABROIDE species. You have one dominant male that lives with multiple females. This is an interesting relationship, and the group ratio is 9 females for every 1 male. So the male characteristics, they will stress out the other females with dominant swimming. So as we talked about the characteristics earlier, this is prominent in the male fish. So they will bump into them, they will swim around them. That's going to stress them out. Okay, when the male dies, the dominant female becomes a male in a few weeks. Well, why? Because she's no longer stressed out. So nobody's doing the stressing out anymore, and the stressing out actually prevents the testosterone formation in the female individuals. It actually encourages the estrogen production, which keeps them females. So the dominant female becomes a male in a few weeks. The new male, which was previously a female, then stresses out the other females with dominant swimming, and that's going to prevent them from becoming males. So the new male stresses out the other females. Mechanism, it's believed that the male stresses out the others to induce estrogen production, and it keeps the other fish females. When the male dies, there is no more stress there, no more dominant swimming, so the dominant female stops making the estrogen. Since the dominant female will stop making the estrogen, then the testosterone production will increase, and then that female will become a male. The reason for success: males are only produced when they are needed. That's a joke, by the way. Excuse me. So we're coming to the end. The frequency of breeding. So small creatures like a crab produces very frequently with large numbers of eggs. So they will have large number of eggs. They will either be spawned or they will be retained on the female and then released to go out into the ocean. Large creature, like a whale, they produce very infrequently with fewer young. So there's this typical size characteristic. The larger that you are, the larger that your young are going to be, the more protected that they're going to be, and the fewer breeding that you'll have for that species. The smaller the species, the smaller the individuals. You have a large number of eggs that are either broadcast as eggs or young. A large amount of them are going to be consumed by predators very, very quickly. Those are some of the characteristics that you see in the wild. And lastly, looking at mating. Just like sharks, we have copulation, which is going to be internal. You can have spawning, like bony fish. That's external fertilization. So there's a comparison and contrast. Internal fertilization versus external fertilization. Copulation versus spawning. Some species will change color to indicate the readiness to the partner. And some fish even have some type of courtship with dances or postures or swimming patterns to indicate that they want to breed. And lastly, we have brooding. And this is, for example, what we saw with the seahorse. They maintain their eggs either in pouches or on the surface of their body. And instead of broadcasting the eggs, either as just eggs or even larvae, we're going to retain those eggs on the seahorse for as long as possible. And that will increase the survival rate because at least they'll have the ability to swim for themselves. And not much for protection since they're going to be small and then broadcast after the egg stage, but at least the eggs won't be consumed because they're going to be sticking to the parent. Okay, that's about it. We'll see you guys later.